Hi, this is part 5 of my flat earth presentation. I'm going to explain a little about airplanes, how they fly, and what we're told about this action of flying. Again, this will be brief, but I will try to pack as much information in one presentation as possible to fully grasp this. This is part 5, airplanes. NASA tries to explain flight. NASA wrote in 1988 about derivation and definition of a linear aircraft model. This research was done by Eugene L. Duke, Robert F. Antwitz, and Keith D. Cranberry at Ames Research Center, Trade Flight Research Center facility, Edwards, California. In this, they talk about all the so-called math, angles, axis, rotation, drag, acceleration, and matrices. Everything that you could think of when it comes to flying a basic plane, at the least. Remember, most of what NASA tells us as fact is not at all true. This report derives and defines a set of linear system matrices for a rigid aircraft of constant mass, flying in a stationary atmosphere over a flat, stationary, non-rotating Earth. Both generalized and standard linear system equations are derived from nonlinear 6-degree of freedom equations of motion in a large collection of nonlinear observations. Here's just a list of words and math they try to use to explain how planes work on an Earth that is flat and stationary. This derivation of linear model is general, and makes no assumptions on the reference trajectory about which model is linearized or the symmetry of the vehicle mass and aerodynamic properties. And there's tons of other documents and papers to read about this. This one alone has 102 pages. And here it is right here, the document itself. Page 30, concluding remarks. This report derives and defines a set of linearized system matrices for a rigid aircraft of constant mass flying in a stationary atmosphere over a flat, non-rotating Earth. Once again, Ames Research Center, Trade Flight Research Facility, NASA in Edwards, California, 1987. Matrix and matrices. I find it interesting they use the words matrix and matrices to describe planes and flight. The official definition of matrices is an arrangement of numbers into rows and columns, often referred to as 2x3 matrix or matrix of dimensions because they stack them on top of each other. Here's an example. I can go deeper with the etymology, but I'll save that for another video and possibly even Patreon, so check for that. Also, for definition, it says matrices is a rectangular array or table of numbers, symbols, or expressions arranged in rows and columns. Here's another example. Now this gets into a lot of math and geometry algebra, which I'm not a math teacher, but this is taught to all kids at some point, and I understand the basics of it. A real matrix and a complex matrix are matrices for another name for real numbers or complex numbers. Matrix multiplication of two matrices is defined if and only the number of columns of the left matrix is the same as the number of rows in the right matrix. NASA tries to explain flight. Air is a physical substance which has weight. It has molecules that are always moving. Air pressure is then created. Moving air will force balloons, kites up and down. Gravity means weight in Latin. Air is a mixture of gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. Like I explained in my sun video, check that out if you haven't. I'm going to make a separate video about gravity that will add to this presentation. They explain all gravity is just mass attracting mass, but only for huge objects like the moon and Earth. We don't see that naturally here on Earth and can't reproduce it. Now, of course, people are going to see this and think, well, NASA knows and they're just explaining it. No, let me break this down. Molecules that are moving, always moving, yes, that's wind. But no object starts moving by itself like a table or a chair. This is Newton's law of motion, which I'll get into in a minute. They say you would weigh less or more in outer space. That doesn't even make sense because how can you weigh less or more? This alone disproves gravity and the globe. All things flying need air. Air has power to push and pull birds, balloons, kites, and airplanes. In 1640, Evangelista Torricelli discovered air has weight, which is around the same time as Newton, Galileo, Grimaldi, and Riccoli, like I talked about in my Coriolis and motion presentation. When experimenting with measuring mercury, he discovered air put pressure on the mercury. Wait, doesn't air always push? Think of a window open with the curtain and the wind is blowing outside. This proves air is causing pressure, which is old news. Hot air expands and spreads out and it becomes lighter than cool air. When a balloon is filled with hot air, it rises because the hot air expands. When the hot air cools and is let out the balloon to let the balloon descend. Now, how is gravity affecting this? Well, they say just because a balloon rises, the gravity is just smaller and the buoyancy force exerted on the hot air inside the balloon. Let me get this right. So the gravity that doesn't really affect this balloon, that weighs more than people, but is able to rise through hot air pressure inside of the balloon, which by the way is technically contained inside of an object. So this proves two things. One, really there is no gravity, and once again, there is no gravity. Because gas or air cannot be pressurized unless there is a container like this balloon here. And it has an opening at the bottom to let cool air out. Right, but it's still there because of the hot pressure and it's able to rise and stay up. No need for gravity. Also, the vacuum of space is not actually a vacuum according to science. A vacuum uses differential pressure for suction, but the vacuum of space is a devoid of matter. Wait, doesn't space have trillions of stars? And so the emptiness of space is why they call it a vacuum, and space itself has very low pressure. That's why there's no air, and it does create a force like vacuum. So if space has very low pressure, what does it make it? Anyway, I'll get into more of that in another video. Now back to NASA. To repeat, hot air balloons do not need gravity. Also, if things rise because its buoyancy is greater than gravity, how do heavy objects like a plane rise? The engines kind of work the same. The engines spin a turbine that's supposed to cool the air in the back while taking in hotter air in the front. The plane flies straight. Now, a plane's wings help it move faster in air by air moving on top of the wing, creating less pressure. When pressure decreases, the plane goes faster. This is how a plane is able to lift. Again, no gravity needed. Newton's laws of motion just say this: when an object is pushed in one direction, there's always a resistance of the same in an opposite direction. Second, objects will move farther and faster when they are pushed harder. Okay, that's agreeable, but how does this prove the shape of the Earth? And third is if an object is moving, it will not start moving by itself, which is true. Someone or something is needed to make the object move. This is true for the Earth as well. What caused it to move? No one can answer that because none of us were here when it started. But for the most part, this is true. When was the last time you saw or heard something not alive move by itself? A plane flies using forces like lift, drag, weight, and thrust, or upward, backward, downward, and forward. These are the only motions used and everywhere on this earth, stated by NASA themselves. You also have pitch, yaw, and roll. Roll is basically left and right. Pitch is ascending and descending, like lift and weight. Yaw is the turning of the plane using rudders. That's all they explain about flight. I did a quick Google search. What keeps a plane in the air? An aircraft in a straight and level flight is acted upon by four forces: lift and drag. So drag equals thrust. Here's where it gets tricky. Lift is, according to science, equals gravity. Now we can replace that and just say weight or density and mass, because that's what it is. And finally, how a plane takes off. A plane needs to fly straight at high speeds in order to stay in the air. Air flows over the wing rapidly, which throws the air down toward the ground, generating an upward force called lift. That lift overcomes the plane's weight and holds it in the sky. So this is basically saying the air, pressure, and speed holds the plane. No gravity needed. Here's a perfect example of that, what I just explained. The four forces are lift, thrust, weight, and drag. As you can clearly see, what I explained says weight, that's what it is. Even a plane or bird is being weighed down in flight, not because of gravity, just simple weight. Everything will fall down. That's how this really works. The next six slides should be enough not only to disprove the globe and prove the flat Earth, but this alone should be enough to blow any glober out of the water. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you for watching. I hope this information helped.